I'm standing in my driveway at 6 a.m. holding splintered pieces of my grandfather's bridge while diesel fumes burn my throat. 80,000 pounds of concrete truck just crushed the wooden walkway where my late wife Sarah and I used to stroll every evening. Steam rises from fresh tire tracks gouged deep into my lawn. The bridge built in 1940 with my grandfather's own hands, now kindling scattered across the creek. Out steps Cordelia Blackthorne from her white Escalade, those HOA 1 vanity plates catching the morning light. 6 years as our HOA president, and she surveys the destruction like she's reviewing conquered territory. "Oops," she says, clipboard pressed against her chest. Construction access is construction access. The last place that held Sarah's memory, destroyed just to prove a point. But here's what Cordelia didn't know. I'm a retired civil engineer, and I don't just get mad, I get mathematical. What would you do if your HOA president crushed your most precious memories to flex her power? Drop a comment from wherever you're watching, because this revenge story is about to get surgical. My name's Ezra Flanagan, 52, retired civil engineer living on 2 acres in Millbrook Heights, Colorado. 18 months ago, cancer stole my wife, Sarah, and that little wooden bridge became the only place I could still feel her presence. Every morning I'd sit there with my coffee, listening to the creek gurgle over smooth stones, breathing in the sharp scent of pine sap from those hand-hewn support beams my grandfather carved in 1940. The handrails felt like silk under my palms. 3 generations of hands had polished them smooth. Sarah and I crossed that bridge twice daily for 15 years, her fingers always trailing along the weathered wood as we talked about everything and nothing. The sound of her laughter still echoed off the water when the wind was just right. Then Hurricane Cordelia blew into my life like a bureaucratic tornado with a law degree. Picture a woman who weaponizes clipboards and speaks fluent legalese. Cordelia Blackthorne, 48, sharp-suited and sharper-tongued, carrying official binders like they contained state secrets. She'd been our HOA president for 6 uncontested years. Nobody else wanted the job because dealing with Cordelia was like volunteering for dental surgery without anesthesia. Those white Escalade vanity plates reading HOA 1 might as well say, "Fear me." Her husband Thaddeus owns half the construction companies in our county, which explains why our 127-home community somehow needs more emergency repairs than the International Space Station. Her first strike came on a Tuesday that started perfectly normal. I'm enjoying my bridge coffee ritual when gravel crunches in my driveway like breaking bones. Out steps Cordelia, measuring tape in one hand, clipboard in the other, wearing an expression like she's discovered a health code violation at her favorite restaurant. "Mr. Flanagan, no pleasantries, just business. Anonymous complaint about your unsafe pedestrian structure. State regulations require immediate engineering inspection or demolition proceeds within 30 days. I set my mug down carefully. Really wanted to launch it at her perfectly styled head. "Ma'am, this bridge has been here since before your HOA existed. Current safety codes weren't written in 1940, already scribbling notes with the fury of an angry accountant. I've contacted 3 qualified firms. Inspection fees start at $8,500. $8,500. To inspect a bridge that had supported 3 generations of my family without so much as a wobbly board. Here's where it gets interesting. All 3 firms belong to Thaddeus's business network. What are the odds? Being an engineer, I recognized premium-grade bureaucratic bullshit when I saw it. So I hired an independent Denver firm, paid $1,200 for a real inspection. Their 47-page verdict? My grandfather's bridge exceeded modern safety codes by comfortable margins, better built than most contemporary structures. I hand-delivered their report with a cover letter explaining the bridge's impeccable safety record and historical significance to our community. Cordelia's response arrived 3 days later. Report insufficient. Alternative assessment required. This is tyranny 101. It's never about safety, always about submission. Cordelia had systematically crushed every neighbor who dared question her authority. The elderly Kowalski couple faced lawsuits over garden gnomes violating aesthetic standards. The young Michaels family got liens for their kids' treehouse exceeding height restrictions by 3 measly inches. Mysteriously, every violation required expensive solutions from Thaddeus's companies. Our monthly dues had jumped 40% in 2 years, all funding infrastructure improvements that seemed to improve exactly 1 bank account. But targeting my bridge crossed a line from bureaucratic bullying into personal warfare. This wasn't about building codes. This was about erasing the last physical connection to Sarah, the only place where 15 years of marriage memories felt real. The bitter taste of antacids became my daily breakfast as I realized Cordelia wasn't backing down. What I didn't know yet was how many neighbors were suffering her systematic abuse in silence, or how deep her financial corruption ran through our community's books. That's when I remembered something from engineering school. The best way to bring down a corrupt structure is to carefully remove the foundation that's been illegally supporting it. Game on, Cordelia. The morning after my bridge became expensive kindling, Cordelia launched her damage control campaign with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball through a stained glass window. "Mr. Flanagan," she announced during her next uninvited visit, clipboard clutched like a medieval shield. "I've spoken with the construction foreman about yesterday's unfortunate incident. Terrible miscommunication regarding the emergency water main repair route." The cloying scent of her floral perfume mixed with lingering diesel fumes, creating an olfactory disaster that made my sinuses revolt. She handed me a crisp business card with practiced sympathy that wouldn't fool a golden retriever. "Thaddeus's premium cleanup service can remove all debris for just $2,400. Fully insured, completely professional, discreetly handled." $2,400 to clean up the mess her miscommunication had created. The woman had brass ovaries the size of church bells. But here's where Cordelia made her first critical mistake. See, 30 years of engineering work had trained me to document everything obsessively. Sarah used to joke that I'd probably photograph my own funeral if I could figure out the logistics. The moment I'd heard that cement truck rumbling toward my property at dawn, I'd started recording on my phone. I also did something Cordelia clearly hadn't anticipated. I called the utility company directly. "Excuse me," I said to the dispatcher, "but I need to confirm the emergency water main work scheduled for Millbrook Heights this morning." Long pause. Papers shuffling, computer keys clicking. "Sir, we don't show any scheduled work in your area until next spring. Someone's provided you with completely incorrect information. Game, set, and match." I spent that afternoon tracking down the cement truck driver at a construction site across town. Took 3 cups of coffee, a box of glazed donuts, and my most sympathetic fellow working man expression, but eventually Jake spilled everything like a broken fire hydrant. "Look, man," he said, glancing around nervously, "I probably shouldn't be talking about this, but that HOA lady paid me $200 cash to take what she called the scenic route through your property. Said it was pre-approved emergency access for utility work." Jake showed me the text messages on his phone, clear instructions from Cordelia about timing, route, and most importantly, assurances that any minor property damage would be fully covered by his company's insurance. Except Jake didn't know what I'd already discovered that morning. His insurance policy specifically excluded coverage for intentional property damage and willful operator misconduct. Cordelia had set him up to take the fall harder than a drunk tightrope walker. That evening, I filed a police report for criminal mischief and conspiracy. Years ago, when a neighbor's kid had vandalized my truck, I'd learned that Colorado law treats property damage over $1,000 as a serious crime, especially when you can prove intent through circumstantial evidence. My grandfather's bridge was worth considerably more than $1,000, and I had circumstantial evidence pouring out like water through a broken dam. Something I'd picked up during that truck incident: always document everything before confronting anyone in property disputes, because evidence disappears faster than free donuts at a police station. The next morning delivered 3 beautiful developments. First, my security cameras showed Cordelia arriving at the accident scene exactly 4 minutes after impact. For someone who'd supposedly just learned about the emergency, she'd made Olympic record time. Second, Jake's phone records revealed he'd received that cash payment text at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the miscommunication allegedly occurred. Unless Cordelia had mastered time travel, her timeline had more holes than Swiss cheese. Third, and most delicious, I discovered she'd pre-written an HOA violation notice for unsafe debris obstruction, dated the day before my bridge was destroyed. The woman was about as good at covering her tracks as a tap dancer in wet concrete. Within a week, 3 neighbors approached me privately with information that warmed my vengeful heart. Mrs. Kowalski had overheard Jake bragging to another driver about that crazy HOA lady throwing money around. Devin Michaels had photographed Cordelia's Escalade parked near the construction staging area the night before. Even quiet Mr. Bridgewater mentioned seeing suspicious early morning activity. Patricia Henley, our local newspaper editor and retired investigative journalist, offered to examine HOA financial records with professional thoroughness. Her findings were spectacular. Over 2 years, Thaddeus's various companies had received over $340,000 in contracts from our 127-home community. That's an impressive amount of emergency maintenance for a neighborhood barely old enough to get a driver's license. But Cordelia wasn't finished demonstrating her bureaucratic flexibility. The day after I filed criminal charges, she scheduled an emergency board meeting to address problem residents and escalating community safety threats. The agenda item that made me smile? Special assessment authorization for Comprehensive Legal Defense Fund. She wanted every homeowner to fund lawyers fighting the criminal charges her own stupidity had earned. Standing in my driveway that evening, staring at the empty space where 80 years of family history used to bridge the gap between past and present, I made a decision that would reshape our entire community. Cordelia thought intimidation and financial pressure would force my surrender. She was about to learn that sometimes the most effective defense involves engineering an absolutely devastating offense. 2 weeks after filing criminal charges, I decided to rebuild my bridge. Simple plan, modern materials, grandfather's design, stronger foundation. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, as Cordelia quickly demonstrated. The moment my rebuild application hit the county desk, she materialized like a bureaucratic demon summoned by paperwork. Apparently, my new construction now required an environmental impact study before any permits could be issued. Mr. Flanagan, she announced during her next clipboard-wielding invasion, creek crossings trigger extensive regulatory requirements. Environmental assessment, floodplain analysis, wildlife habitat survey, soil contamination testing, completely standard for waterway projects. The musty smell of freshly printed forms assaulted my nostrils as she handed over paperwork thick enough to stop artillery shells. Each form referenced 3 others, which referenced 6 more, creating a bureaucratic fractal designed by lawyers having fever dreams. The city inspector estimates $12,000 for initial assessment, she continued with poorly concealed glee, though comprehensive environmental studies often exceed initial estimates, depending on discoveries. $12,000. To rebuild a bridge that had coexisted peacefully with local wildlife for 8 decades without incident. I spent the following week ping-ponging between government offices like a confused tourist in bureaucratic hell. Environmental sent me to planning. Planning dispatched me to engineering. Engineering bounced me back to environmental. Each department demanded different forms, different fees, different interpretations of regulations that seemed to evolve hourly. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like caffeinated mosquitoes, while I queued behind contractors who appeared equally baffled. The courthouse coffee, tasting somewhere between transmission fluid and regret, became my reluctant breakfast companion as I accumulated enough paperwork to construct my own bridge from pure documentation. But government offices harbor interesting characters, including clerks who've witnessed every municipal scam since the Carter administration. During my 4th environmental department pilgrimage, the receptionist, a steel-haired grandmother with penetrating eyes and zero tolerance for nonsense, leaned forward conspiratorially. "Sweetie," she whispered, "I've worked here 23 years and this is the most elaborate runaround I've ever witnessed. You might investigate who's orchestrating these requirements." That afternoon delivered divine intervention via human incompetence. The environmental consultant, rushing to update Cordelia on his fabricated findings, accidentally emailed me instead of her. "Per our financial arrangement, I'll identify environmental violations regardless of actual site conditions. The wetland designation should justify extending timeline to minimum 6 months. Invoice attached for services rendered. Please remit payment to usual offshore account." 6 months of delays, predetermined violations, purchased outcomes. My engineering education had covered regulatory capture, when watchdog agencies become industry lapdogs, but I'd never seen corruption this brazen. It was like watching someone rob a bank while live streaming the heist. I forwarded that email to Patricia Henley, who attacked public records with investigative bloodhound intensity. Her discoveries were criminally beautiful. The consultant's wife worked for Thaddeus's development firm. The inspector demanding $12,000 owned a yacht registered under Thaddeus's business name. The planning supervisor had received $18,000 in consulting fees from Blackthorn Construction. They'd created a corruption ecosystem with its own food chain. Years earlier, fighting the city over drainage disputes, I'd discovered the Colorado Open Records Act. Citizens can demand copies of all government communications, including emails, texts, and internal memos. Officials might stall or deflect, but Sunshine eventually disinfects everything digital. Public employees create paper trails like breadcrumbs. Follow them before someone sweeps up the evidence. I filed comprehensive open records requests for all correspondence between inspector, consultant, and planning department regarding my project. When response deadlines passed ignored, I escalated to state environmental protection and ethics commissions, copying every participant. The reaction was immediate and beautiful. My complex environmental assessment suddenly qualified for fast-track processing at $800, Colorado's standard bridge permit fee. The consultant apologized for miscommunication regarding timeline requirements. The inspector discovered computational errors in his cost estimates. But Cordelia wasn't surrendering. She was evolving. The following week brought a special property assessment for emergency debris removal and environmental remediation following bridge destruction. Total, $8,900 plus administrative fees, payable within 30 days or face lien procedures. She was billing me for cleaning up her own crime scene. The audacity was spectacular, like being mugged, then receiving an invoice for the mugger's time and emotional labor. That evening, I recruited Margaret Kowalski, a retired FBI forensic accountant who'd relocated specifically to escape urban corruption. Corruption had apparently followed her here, and she was delighted to apply professional skills to our neighborhood problem. Ezra, she said, studying HOA financial records, this transcends simple theft. It's systematic racketeering with RICO implications. Her spreadsheets revealed prosecutor-grade evidence, vendor contracts inflated 300%, payment for services never performed, administrative fees flowing directly into Thaddeus's accounts. My bridge was merely the latest casualty in a war I'd unknowingly been losing for years, but ignorance was ending. Armed with mathematics, documentation, and an engineer's methodical fury, I was ready to construct Cordelia's downfall with the same precision my grandfather had used building bridges. Antacids were giving way to anticipation. Cordelia's next assault came wrapped in official letterhead and delivered by certified mail. 3 separate notices arrived within a week, each more financially devastating than the last. First, a retroactive structural impact assessment fee for bridge debris, allegedly affecting neighborhood drainage. $2,400, due immediately. Second, an emergency landscaping restoration levy to repair environmental damage caused by my negligent maintenance practices. $3,800 with late fees compounding daily. Third, and most creative, a community safety enhancement surcharge to fund additional security measures necessitated by my hostile behavior toward neighborhood leadership. $4,100 described as non-negotiable and binding. $10,000 in manufactured debt designed to crush me financially while funding her legal defense against the criminal charges I'd filed. The smell of fresh legal documents invaded my kitchen as I spread them across the table, each one stamped with threatening red ink that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Cordelia's strategy was elegantly vicious: bury me in fabricated fees until I couldn't afford to fight back. But she'd made a critical error in targeting someone who understood both engineering principles and financial mathematics. I called Margaret Kowalski immediately. Within hours, she was sitting in my living room with her laptop, reading glasses perched like a hawk preparing to dive on prey. "Ezra," she said, fingers flying across her keyboard. "These assessments are more than illegal. They're spectacularly stupid. Let me show you why." Her forensic accounting background had taught her to follow money trails like a bloodhound following scent. What she discovered in the HOA's incorporation documents was pure gold. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a clause buried in page 47 of the original 1987 filing. "Any special assessment exceeding $5,000 per household requires supermajority consent. 75% of homeowners must approve in recorded vote." I leaned closer, reading the legalese that had been gathering dust for decades. "But here's the beautiful part," Margaret continued, pulling up spreadsheets. "Cordelia has been imposing these assessments since 2018 without any member votes. Every single one was legally invalid." She showed me the numbers. 43 separate assessments over 5 years, totaling nearly $200,000 in unauthorized charges. Each household had been systematically robbed of an average $1,600 through Cordelia's illegal fee structure. But Margaret wasn't finished excavating. Her investigation revealed that the HOA's governing documents could only be amended through the specific voting procedures outlined in the original covenants. Every rule change Cordelia had implemented since taking office, including the authority to impose these assessments, was legally worthless. From my previous battles with municipal bureaucracy, I'd learned that Colorado's Common Interest Ownership Act requires HOAs to maintain detailed financial records available for member inspection within 10 business days of any written request. Most HOA boards try to hide their books, but legally, they're required to be transparent as fishbowls. Demand to see HOA financial records they can't legally refuse, and their panic response tells you everything. Margaret filed a formal records request that afternoon. Cordelia's response was immediate and revealing. Financial records contain proprietary information and cannot be disclosed without board approval. Wrong answer. We filed a complaint with the Colorado Division of Real Estate the same day. Within a week, the state ordered immediate compliance. The records that arrived were incomplete, obviously sanitized, and missing crucial documentation, but they contained enough evidence to hang everyone involved. Margaret's analysis revealed systematic theft on an industrial scale. Vendor contracts showed Thaddeus's companies had been paid for services never performed. Administrative fees had been diverted to personal accounts. Insurance payouts for legitimate claims had disappeared into a labyrinth of shell companies. "This isn't just corruption," Margaret said, highlighting entries with yellow marker. "It's money laundering. They've been using the HOA as a personal ATM for years." The numbers were staggering. Over 5 years, approximately $240,000 had been systematically stolen from homeowner dues and assessments. Each family had been victimized to fund Cordelia's empire of petty tyranny. But Margaret's most devastating discovery came from cross-referencing HOA expenditures with state business registration records. Cordelia had been authorizing payments to companies that existed only on paper, elaborate shell games designed to move community money into personal accounts. "Look at this beauty," Margaret said, showing me a particularly creative transaction. $47,000 paid to Millbrook Environmental Consulting, a company that was incorporated the day before the payment and dissolved the day after. Guess who the registered agent was? Thaddeus Blackthorne, of course. The pattern was clear, criminal, and completely documented. They'd been running the racketeering operation disguised as community management, and they'd been sloppy enough to leave a paper trail that would make prosecutors weep with joy. That evening, I received a phone call that made my week. Jake, the cement truck driver, had been contacted by investigators following my criminal complaint. Turns out Cordelia's cash payments to destroy my bridge weren't her only documented bribes. "Mr. Flanagan," Jake said, "I thought you should know. I wasn't the only driver she paid for special services. There's a whole network of us she's been using for harassment and intimidation. We've all been keeping records just in case." Just in case had arrived. The next morning brought another certified letter from Cordelia, but this one was different. Her usual commanding tone had been replaced by something approaching desperation. She was offering to negotiate a reasonable settlement regarding the outstanding assessments, suggesting we could work together to resolve community tensions amicably. Translation: she'd finally realized the hole she'd dug was deeper than her ability to climb out. But I wasn't interested in settlements anymore. Armed with Margaret's financial evidence, Jake's testimony, and a growing network of victimized neighbors, I was ready to construct something Cordelia had never seen coming: complete and total accountability. The taste of victory was starting to overpower the lingering flavor of antacids. Margaret's forensic accounting had uncovered something even more devastating than financial theft. As she dug deeper into the HOA's incorporation documents, her expression shifted from professional interest to predatory satisfaction. "Ezra," she said, removing her reading glasses with theatrical slowness, "Cordelia's entire authority is built on legal quicksand." She spread the original 1987 incorporation documents across my kitchen table like a poker player revealing a royal flush. The pages smelled of decades-old ink and bureaucratic formality, but they contained dynamite. "Look at Article 7, Section 3, Margaret pointed to a clause that would change everything. "The original covenants require annual financial audits by independent certified public accountants. No exceptions, no waivers, no excuses." I leaned closer, reading the archaic legal language that had been gathering dust for 37 years. "But here's the kill shot," Margaret continued, pulling up her laptop. "I checked with the state. No audits have been filed since Cordelia took control in 2018. 0. Under Colorado law, HOAs that fail to comply with mandatory audit requirements for more than 2 consecutive years face automatic dissolution proceedings." My engineering brain immediately grasped the implications. For 6 years, Cordelia had been operating an illegally constituted organization. Every fine, every assessment, every violation notice she'd issued was legally worthless. Theft disguised as authority. "It gets better," Margaret said, clearly enjoying herself. "The original incorporation also requires board elections every 2 years with verified member voting. I cross-referenced with county records. No legitimate elections have been held since 2018. She's been a self-appointed dictator masquerading as an elected official." The documentation painted a picture of systematic fraud that would make federal prosecutors dance with joy. Cordelia hadn't just been stealing money. She'd been operating a criminal enterprise under the pretense of legal community management. Margaret pulled up spreadsheets showing the financial scope of the fraud. Over 5 years, $240,000 had been diverted from legitimate community expenses into Thaddeus's business network. Every homeowner had been systematically robbed of approximately $1,800 through unauthorized assessments and inflated service contracts. But here's what makes this beautiful, Margaret said, highlighting specific entries. Because she had no legal authority to impose any of these charges, every payment extracted constitutes theft under Colorado criminal statutes. We're not talking civil violations anymore. This is felony territory. The paper trail revealed a criminal conspiracy that stretched beyond simple HOA corruption. Shell companies, fabricated invoices, money laundering through multiple business entities. They'd created a sophisticated theft operation that had been bleeding our community dry for years. From my research into property law during the permit battles, I'd learned that Colorado's Racketeering Act allows prosecutors to pursue enhanced penalties when criminal activity follows organized patterns. Margaret's evidence showed exactly that kind of systematic criminal enterprise. Colorado's RICO statutes treat patterned criminal activity as organized crime, document the pattern, and individual thefts become conspiracy charges with triple damages. The irony is perfect, Margaret said, closing her laptop with satisfaction. Cordelia's been so focused on maintaining the appearance of authority that she documented every illegal transaction. She's created a prosecutor's dream case against herself. The evidence revealed that Cordelia's power had always been an illusion. No legal elections, no required audits, no legitimate authority to impose the fees and fines that had terrorized our neighborhood for years. She'd been running a protection racket disguised as community governance. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. Margaret had discovered that several other Colorado HOAs had filed similar complaints against boards operating without proper legal foundation. The state was beginning to recognize a pattern of HOA fraud that extended far beyond our little community. Ezra, Margaret said, gathering the documents with the care of someone handling explosives, what we have here isn't just evidence of local corruption. It's documentation of a systematic fraud scheme that could bring down corrupt HOA boards across the state. The power dynamic had completely reversed. Cordelia thought she was crushing me with manufactured legal pressure, but she'd actually been building the case for her own destruction. Every threatening letter, every fabricated assessment, every abuse of imaginary authority had created more evidence for criminal prosecution. I sat back in my kitchen chair, surrounded by documents that represented 6 years of systematic theft and abuse, and realized that my grandfather's destroyed bridge had become the key that unlocked justice for an entire community. Cordelia had no idea that her empire was about to collapse under the weight of its own illegal foundation. But she was about to learn that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting criminals convict themselves through their own documented stupidity. The taste of victory was getting stronger. The day after Margaret's devastating revelations, I converted my destroyed bridge workshop into something Cordelia never would have anticipated. A war room that would make FBI investigators proud. Cork boards covered every available wall surface, connected by red string like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Financial timelines stretched across one wall, documenting 6 years of systematic theft. Property maps on another showed the geographic scope of Cordelia's corruption. Digital evidence repositories, encrypted and backed up in multiple locations, contained terabytes of documentation that would make prosecutors weep with gratitude. The sweet smell of fresh printer paper filled the workshop as evidence multiplied daily. Every document, every email, every financial transaction had been cataloged, cross-referenced, and prepared for legal presentation with the methodical precision that only comes from decades of engineering project management. But I wasn't working alone anymore. Margaret Kowalski had transformed from retired FBI forensic accountant into the general of our Justice Army. She'd recruited Devin Michaels, a cybersecurity consultant whose technical expertise made our evidence bulletproof against claims of fabrication or manipulation. Patricia Henley, the investigative journalist, had uncovered municipal corruption networks that extended far beyond our neighborhood. And James Bridgewater, a constitutional law attorney specializing in HOA disputes, was working pro bono because, as he put it, sometimes justice needs a helping hand. Devin's contribution was particularly elegant. He'd created blockchain-verified timestamps for every piece of digital evidence, making it impossible for Cordelia's lawyers to claim documentation had been altered or fabricated. His security sweeps had also revealed something disturbing. Cordelia had been conducting illegal surveillance on multiple neighbors, not just me. Look at this, Devin said, showing me GPS tracking data from devices found on 3 different vehicles. She's been monitoring everyone who's questioned her authority. This isn't just corruption, it's systematic stalking. Our evidence compilation revealed criminal activity that stretched far beyond financial theft. Harassment, intimidation, surveillance, conspiracy, money laundering. Cordelia had managed to violate approximately 17 different state and federal statutes in her quest to maintain control over our community. James, our constitutional attorney, explained the legal framework that would bring down Cordelia's empire. From my previous research into property disputes, I'd learned that Colorado's Racketeering Act allows prosecutors to pursue enhanced penalties when criminal patterns involve multiple victims and extended time frames. Our documentation showed exactly that kind of systematic criminal enterprise operating under the guise of community management. Pattern documentation transforms individual crimes into organized conspiracy, the difference between misdemeanor harassment and federal racketeering charges. Patricia's media strategy was equally devastating. Her investigation had revealed that similar HOA corruption cases were emerging across Colorado, suggesting a statewide pattern of abuse. Our case would become the flagship prosecution that exposed systematic fraud throughout the industry. We're not just seeking justice for Millbrook Heights, Patricia explained. We're creating legal precedent that will protect homeowners across the state from similar abuse. The community response exceeded our most optimistic projections. Our secret Facebook group, Millbrook Heights Truth, had grown to include 89 affected households. Monthly meetings, disguised as neighborhood watch gatherings, had become strategy sessions where neighbors shared their own documentation of Cordelia's abuse. The stories were heartbreaking and infuriating. Elderly residents harassed over garden decorations, young families threatened with liens for children's playground equipment, veterans intimidated for displaying flags. Cordelia had been systematically terrorizing our community for years, and everyone had suffered in silence, believing they were alone. But the most satisfying element of our preparation was psychological. Margaret had recommended that I appear to surrender, requesting a private settlement conference that would allow Cordelia to believe she'd won complete victory. The plan was elegant. Let her celebrate publicly while we prepared for maximum impact revelation. Narcissists like Cordelia can't resist gloating, Margaret explained. Give her a stage and she'll perform her own destruction. We scheduled the annual HOA meeting for December 15th, exactly 2 weeks away. Every household would be invited to witness what they expected would be my public capitulation. Local media had been contacted about covering a successful community leadership resolution. Even the police had been alerted about potential criminal complaints following the meeting. The sound of allies collaborating filled my workshop as we rehearsed presentation sequences and prepared for every possible scenario. James had drafted criminal complaints ready for immediate filing. Patricia had media contacts prepared for follow-up coverage. Devin had created multiple backup systems preventing evidence destruction. Margaret had calculated exact restitution amounts for every victimized household. The texture of legal documents, warm from fresh printing, reminded me of my grandfather's construction blueprints, detailed plans for building something meant to last. But instead of bridges, we were constructing justice. Every evening, I'd walk to where my bridge used to span the creek, coffee mug in hand, and feel Sarah's presence in the growing community solidarity. Her memory was being honored not just through seeking personal justice, but through protecting every neighbor from the systematic abuse we'd all endured. The taste of anticipation had completely replaced the bitter flavor of antacids. In 2 weeks, Cordelia's empire of petty tyranny would collapse under the weight of her own documented crimes. But first, she needed to believe she'd won. Cordelia must have sensed the gathering storm, because her tactics shifted from bureaucratic harassment to something that felt dangerously personal. It started with whispers. Neighbors mentioned hearing rumors about my mental instability following Sarah's death. Anonymous flyers appeared in mailboxes describing me as potentially dangerous to community safety and obsessed with revenge fantasies. Social media accounts with suspicious profile pictures began posting negative comments about my bridge reconstruction plans, calling them monuments to grief and neighborhood eyesores. The smell of diesel exhaust became a daily assault as Thaddeus's construction crews began routine street maintenance that coincidentally required heavy equipment to idle directly outside my property. Jackhammers started promptly at 6 a.m., followed by steamrollers, cement mixers, and industrial fans that blew dust and fumes directly toward my windows. "Sorry about the noise," one worker said with a smirk when I approached. "Roadwork takes as long as it takes." Except the roadwork seemed remarkably focused on the 50-yard stretch in front of my driveway. But Cordelia's mistake was escalating to tactics that left digital fingerprints. Devin's security expertise proved invaluable when he discovered listening devices in my workshop and a GPS tracker attached to my truck's undercarriage. Professional-grade surveillance equipment doesn't appear by accident. Someone with serious money had invested in monitoring my activities. "This is federal territory now," Devin said, photographing the devices before carefully removing them. "Interstate transportation of surveillance equipment, violation of privacy statutes, conspiracy to commit stalking. She's graduated from HOA tyrant to genuine criminal." The surveillance discovery led to an even more disturbing revelation. License plate tracking identified the security contractor Cordelia had hired, Blackwater Consulting, a private investigation firm owned by, surprise, another shell company registered to Thaddeus. They'd been monitoring not just me, but several neighbors who'd questioned Cordelia's authority. Margaret's house had been under surveillance for 3 weeks. Patricia's newspaper office had been photographed multiple times. Even quiet Mr. Bridgewater had been followed to the grocery store. But Cordelia's desperation reached new heights when she attempted direct bribery. The accidental encounter happened at the supermarket, where she appeared beside me in the produce section like a designer-suited ghost. The artificial sweetness of her perfume couldn't mask the nervous energy radiating from her rigid posture. "Ezra," she said, pretending to examine avocados, "I've been thinking about our situation. Perhaps we've both been too rigid in our positions." She glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. "I've discovered some irregularities in previous assessments, computational errors primarily. I'm prepared to offer $50,000 to resolve any outstanding disputes amicably. 50 grand, cash settlement, no questions asked. Additionally," she continued, voice dropping to a whisper, "the board is considering creating a senior advisory position. Consulting fees could be quite generous for someone with your engineering expertise." I kept my expression neutral while the small recording device in my jacket pocket captured every word. Years of dealing with construction site corruption had taught me that the most dangerous conversations happen in the most innocent locations. "That's interesting," I said carefully. "Let me think about it." Her relief was palpable. "Of course, take your time. We're reasonable people seeking reasonable solutions. Reasonable people don't offer $50,000 in grocery store bribes." That evening brought an escalation that crossed every line of civilized behavior. I was reviewing evidence in my workshop when the sound of shattering glass interrupted my concentration. Outside, my truck's windshield had been destroyed by someone with a baseball bat. Security cameras captured everything. A man in dark clothing systematically vandalizing my vehicle while texting someone on his phone. The license plate on his getaway car led police directly to Marcus Webb, a career criminal with extensive connections to Thaddeus's business network. When police arrested Marcus, his phone contained text messages that made prosecutors smile. Orders from Cordelia about escalating pressure and making problems disappear. Payment records for previous harassment campaigns. Even discussions about permanent solutions to the Flanagan problem. From my research into harassment statutes during the permit battles, I'd learned that Colorado law treats patterns of stalking and intimidation as aggravated crimes, especially when they involve property damage and surveillance. Individual incidents might seem minor, but documented patterns establish criminal intent and conspiracy. Document every harassment incident, no matter how small. Patterns prove criminal intent where isolated events might not. The criminal complaint I filed that night included charges for conspiracy, racketeering, harassment, surveillance violations, and attempted bribery. Marcus's arrest had provided the missing link connecting Cordelia directly to criminal enforcement activities. But the most satisfying development was community response. Other neighbors began reporting similar harassment campaigns they'd endured in silence. The Kowalskis had been subjected to late-night noise complaints and suspicious inspection visits. The Michaels family had received anonymous threats about their children's safety. Even Patricia had discovered tracking devices on her car. Cordelia's systematic intimidation had created a neighborhood full of victims who were finally ready to speak publicly about their experiences. 3 days later, she made her final desperate play. A certified letter arrived requesting a private settlement conference, suggesting we could resolve community tensions through mature negotiation rather than destructive litigation. She wanted to meet December 14th, one day before the annual HOA meeting, where she planned to announce her victory over the problem resident. Perfect. She was walking directly into the trap we'd spent months preparing. The taste of justice was becoming overwhelming. December 14th arrived gray and cold with the kind of bitter wind that makes even Colorado natives question their life choices. The settlement meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the HOA Community Center, the same venue where Cordelia planned to celebrate her victory the following evening. She'd brought an army, her personal attorney, a stenographer, 2 witnesses I didn't recognize, and enough legal documentation to construct a small fort. The conference room smelled of expensive leather briefcases and nervous perspiration poorly disguised by high-end cologne. "Mr. Flanagan," Cordelia began, her voice carrying the confident tone of someone who believed she'd already won, "I think we can reach a mutually beneficial resolution to this unfortunate misunderstanding." The settlement offer was masterfully crafted to appear generous while admitting no wrongdoing. $25,000 for inconvenience and emotional distress, full building permits for bridge reconstruction, withdrawal of all outstanding assessments and violations. All I had to do was sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and formally withdraw every criminal complaint I'd filed. Additionally, her attorney added, sliding documents across the polished table, Mrs. Blackthorne is prepared to offer a formal apology for any miscommunication that may have contributed to recent tensions. Miscommunication. That's what they were calling systematic theft, harassment, and destruction of property. I played my part perfectly, appearing exhausted by months of legal pressure and financial strain. The hidden recording devices in my jacket captured every word as I reluctantly agreed to their terms, signing preliminary documents that were carefully worded to be legally non-binding until final ratification. "This is wise, Ezra," Cordelia said, using my first name with practiced familiarity. "Sometimes the smartest move is knowing when you're beaten." The irony was delicious. Her attorney explained the timeline. Final documents would be prepared overnight, with formal signing scheduled for the next morning. That evening's annual HOA meeting would become a celebration of successful community leadership and peaceful conflict resolution. Cordelia had invited local media to witness her triumph over the disruptive resident who'd learned to respect proper authority. The news coverage would cement her reputation as an effective leader who could handle difficult situations with firm but fair governance. She'd even ordered expensive champagne for the post-meeting celebration. But the most beautiful part of her trap was entirely self-constructed. Every word of our settlement conference was being recorded by multiple hidden devices. Her admissions about pressure tactics and necessary leverage were being captured for posterity. Her casual references to managing difficult residents and maintaining community discipline revealed the authoritarian mindset that had driven 6 years of systematic abuse. "Between us," she said during a break, speaking to her attorney while I pretended to read documents, "this should finally teach the neighborhood what happens when people challenge established authority. Sometimes you have to make examples. Making examples. Like destroying an 80-year-old bridge to prove a point." Her attorney's advice was equally incriminating. "The key is maintaining plausible deniability. As long as we can claim good faith community management, individual incidents become administrative decisions rather than criminal conspiracy." Plausible deniability, criminal conspiracy. They were discussing legal strategy for covering up systematic crimes. After the meeting, Cordelia practically floated to her Escalade, victory radiating from her designer-suited frame. She'd won the war against the troublesome engineer who dared question her authority. Tomorrow evening would be her public vindication, with media coverage cementing her reputation as effective community leadership. What she didn't know was that our technical team had made even more disturbing discoveries during the past week. Devon's final security sweep had revealed the most invasive violation yet, a hidden camera in my bedroom, installed during one of Cordelia's inspection visits months earlier. Federal privacy violations, interstate surveillance crimes, systematic stalking with sophisticated equipment. "This crosses every legal line," James explained when I showed him the evidence. "We're not talking HOA corruption anymore. This is organized criminal enterprise with federal implications." The bedroom camera footage, recovered from Cordelia's surveillance contractor, revealed systematic monitoring of multiple neighborhood residents. She'd been collecting blackmail material on anyone who might challenge her authority, documenting private moments that could be used for future intimidation. Margaret's financial analysis revealed the scope of preparation for tomorrow's confrontation. Cordelia had spent community funds on a professional videographer to document her victory, planning to create promotional materials showcasing her leadership effectiveness for future political aspirations. She was literally paying for the cameras that would broadcast her destruction. That evening, I sat in my kitchen reviewing the evidence that would end Cordelia's reign of terror. 6 years of systematic theft, harassment, surveillance, and intimidation. All documented, all legally actionable, all about to be exposed in front of the entire community she'd been systematically robbing. The taste of anticipation had become overwhelming. In less than 24 hours, Cordelia's carefully constructed empire would collapse in spectacular fashion, broadcast live to the neighborhood she'd terrorized and the media she'd invited to witness her triumph. Justice was about to be served with the precision of a perfectly engineered structure. December 15th, 7 p.m. The Millbrook Heights Community Center was packed beyond fire code capacity, with standing room only, and neighbors lined up outside hoping to witness what they expected would be my final humiliation. Cordelia had orchestrated the evening like a victory parade. She sat at the head table wearing her most expensive suit, gavel positioned like a royal scepter, microphone adjusted for maximum authority projection. Local news cameras captured her confident smile as she surveyed her domain. 127 households gathered to witness the crushing of their most persistent troublemaker. I sat quietly in the back row, manila folder in my lap, wearing my most defeated expression while neighbors whispered about my inevitable surrender. The air buzzed with anticipation and the nervous energy of people watching what they believed would be public execution by bureaucracy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cordelia began, her voice carrying the triumphant tone of conquest. "Tonight we celebrate successful resolution of a challenging community situation. As your elected president, I'm pleased to announce that Mr. Flanagan has agreed to respect established community standards." Applause scattered through the audience, polite, uncertain, but supportive of their supposed leader. "I'd like to invite Ezra forward to confirm his commitment to our community values and proper governance procedures." The walk to that podium felt like crossing a battlefield. Cameras tracked my movement as I approached the microphone, folder clutched against my chest like armor. Cordelia's smile radiated satisfaction as she prepared to witness my public capitulation. I cleared my throat, opened my folder, and looked directly into the news camera. "Yesterday I signed a settlement agreement," I began, watching Cordelia's smile widen. "Tonight, I'm voiding it." The color drained from her face faster than water through a broken dam. 6 months ago, Cordelia Blackthorne ordered the deliberate destruction of my family's bridge to demonstrate her power. What she didn't know was that her crime would unlock the evidence needed to expose 6 years of systematic theft, harassment, and criminal conspiracy. The audience erupted in confused murmurs as I held up the bedroom surveillance camera for everyone to see. This device was illegally installed in my home during a fake inspection. Federal investigators have confirmed that similar equipment was used to spy on multiple neighbors, collecting blackmail material on anyone who dared question her authority. Cordelia tried to call the meeting out of order, reaching for her microphone, but Devin had assumed control of the sound system. Her voice was cut off as the first financial evidence appeared on the community center's projection screen. Over 5 years, Cordelia and her husband Thaddeus systematically stole $240,000 from our community through fabricated assessments, inflated contracts, and shell company fraud. Every household in this room was robbed an average of $1,800. Bank records flashed across the screen showing money flowing from HOA accounts into Thaddeus's business network. Vendor contracts revealed systematic overcharging for services never performed, administrative fees that went directly into personal accounts. "But here's the beautiful part," I continued, watching Cordelia's panic transform into terror. "She never had legal authority to impose any of these charges. No proper elections have been held since 2018. No required financial audits were conducted. Under Colorado law, she's been operating an illegal organization for 6 years." The audience was on its feet now, angry voices rising as neighbors recognized their own financial victimization in the displayed evidence. Every fine, every assessment, every violation notice was theft disguised as authority. Which brings us to tonight's special guests. The community center doors opened as Detective Martinez and her team entered with arrest warrants in hand. The cameras captured everything as handcuffs clicked onto Cordelia's wrists. "Cordelia Blackthorne, you're under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, theft, harassment, and federal surveillance violations. You have the right to remain silent." But Cordelia wasn't remaining silent. She was screaming about fabricated evidence and conspiracy, her authoritative facade crumbling into panicked desperation as she was led away in handcuffs. Thaddeus, attempting to flee through the back exit, was intercepted by federal agents who'd been waiting outside. His arrest warrant included money laundering and interstate conspiracy charges that would keep him occupied for decades. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Standing ovation for courage in exposing the truth. unanimous vote to dissolve the illegal board and schedule legitimate elections, commitment to pursue full prosecution and asset recovery for every victimized household. Every fine you imposed was theft under Colorado law, I called out as Cordelia was led past the news cameras. And every victim in this room will see justice. Patricia's cameras captured it all for the morning news cycle. Devon's live stream reached thousands of viewers across social media. Margaret's financial evidence would be featured in federal prosecution materials for years to come. The taste of justice was sweeter than my grandfather's bridge coffee ritual had ever been. Standing at that podium, surrounded by neighbors who'd finally learned they weren't alone in their victimization, I felt Sarah's presence stronger than ever. Her memory had been honored not just through personal revenge, but through protection of an entire community from systematic abuse. The war was over. Justice had won. 6 months later, I stood on my rebuilt bridge at sunset, coffee mug warming my hands, watching children splash in the creek below while their parents shared stories on the grassy banks. The sound of genuine laughter had replaced years of whispered fears about violation notices and assessment threats. The criminal trials concluded with beautiful efficiency. Cordelia received 4 years in federal prison plus $350,000 in restitution. Turns out judges don't appreciate HOA presidents who think they're dictators. Thaddeus got 6 years for racketeering, with asset forfeiture that recovered most of our stolen money. The corrupt city inspector was fired and permanently barred from public employment. Even Marcus Webb, the hired muscle with the baseball bat, received 18 months for conspiracy. But the real victory was financial justice. Asset seizure recovered $180,000, meaning every household received approximately $1,400 plus interest, money Cordelia had stolen through her fabricated assessments. Remaining funds established the Millbrook Heights Community Improvement Endowment, ensuring transparent governance forever. Our new HOA operates like democracy should. Monthly financial reports appear online for every resident to scrutinize. Vendor contracts require competitive bidding with full disclosure. James Bridgewater, our constitutional attorney, reviews every policy change to prevent future authoritarian takeovers. The bridge reconstruction became neighborhood therapy. Local carpenter guilds donated materials and expertise, rebuilding grandfather's 1940s design with modern safety features while preserving historical character. Neighbors who'd suffered Cordelia's abuse in silence worked together, hammering boards and sharing liberation stories. The smell of fresh pine and wood stain mixed with the satisfaction of collective victory. The dedication ceremony honored Sarah's memory and grandfather's craftsmanship, but represented something larger. Proof that ordinary people can defeat institutional corruption through patience, documentation, and righteous fury properly channeled. My grief transformed into purpose through community service. The workshop where I'd engineered Cordelia's downfall became our neighborhood meeting space, where residents gather monthly to ensure transparent governance. Sarah's presence feels strongest during these gatherings, her laughter echoing in neighbors' voices as they plan improvements and celebrate democratic victories. The Sarah Flanagan Memorial Engineering Scholarship emerged as our most meaningful achievement. Full tuition support for underserved students pursuing engineering education, funded through annual bridge festivals that raise money for environmental conservation. This year's recipients include 3 local kids who watched our democracy lesson unfold in real time. Legal precedent flowed from our case across Colorado. The legislature passed the Homeowner Protection Act requiring independent financial audits and verified elections for all HOAs. Legal aid societies use our documentation for property rights training. Our investigation methods have been requested by advocates in 47 states. Media impact exceeded expectations. The documentary Bridge to Justice chronicles our complete case, while our story inspired similar investigations nationwide. Apparently, corrupt HOA boards are more common than food poisoning at church potlucks. But the most satisfying change was neighborhood transformation. Children ride bicycles without fear of citation. Families display holiday decorations freely. Veterans fly flags proudly. Evening walks across my bridge have become community ritual, with neighbors gathering for sunsets and positive planning rather than fearful whispers. The texture of smooth handrails polished by grateful hands reminds me that some structures, both wooden and democratic, are built to last generations. The scent of pine mingles with sounds of children playing and adults discussing community improvements instead of surviving bureaucratic harassment. Margaret serves as elected treasurer, applying FBI-trained oversight. Devon maintains digital security against surveillance. Patricia documents our democratic processes for other communities. We've become a model for defeating systematic corruption through organized resistance. The message resonates beyond our neighborhood. Individual courage defeats institutional abuse when combined with community solidarity, careful documentation, and persistent legal accountability. Drop a comment sharing your worst HOA horror story. You're not alone, and your experience matters to our growing community fighting homeowner injustice. Check out more David versus Goliath victories on our Karen Stories channel. Hit subscribe if you want more stories where ordinary people defeat corruption through smart strategy, legal knowledge, and collective courage that proves justice isn't just possible, it's inevitable when good people organize. Next week, the apartment manager who thought stealing security deposits was legal until tenants engineered her spectacular downfall using municipal housing codes she'd never read. Standing here at golden hour, surrounded by neighbors who became allies, I feel Sarah's spirit in democratic connections forged through shared struggle. This bridge spans more than water. It connects grief and healing, individual courage and collective triumph, proving that when communities unite against corruption, victory builds foundations lasting generations.